2015 Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger, Councilmember Wagner,
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee, Councilmember Lindsay,
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker,
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Here. I understand Councilmembers Greenlee and Boger will be a little bit late this evening. Are there any members of the public that would like to address council before we get started? We're going right on past that one. New business. Jeanette, Human Resources, Classification and Compensation Results for Non-Represented Positions.
All right. Okay, thank you. So I have a presentation here tonight to go over the results of the classification and compensation study that I've been working on. You'll recall back in August, I brought a new policy forward that you approved, and so following that policy approval, I've been working hard on the analysis, data analysis that I've bringing forward to you this evening. All right, so again, bringing you back to that policy, and within it, there was a section that talked about selection criteria for comparable cities. And in there, it stipulates 50% above and below the size of Washougal as part of that selection criteria. And it also provided or provides other verbiage in terms of other criteria that can be pulled in as it makes sense. And so assessed valuation was used. That's the ability to pay. And in order to get sufficient comparable data for the benchmark positions that you'll see, I used essentially 30% above and below our assessed valuation. The numbers you see here are actually 2014 numbers. I was using it right off the MRSC website, and at the time the 2015 data had not been published. So these are 2014 numbers I'm using. And then also eliminate those cities that are on the eastern side of Washington due to their economy being dissimilar to ours. Okay, so in terms of the comparable cities, we've got 15 listed here. And you can see in terms of the median, when we're looking at the size of the city population, 17,660 versus Washougal at 14,910. And then the assessed valuation per capita, they're at 87,544, very, very close to us at 86,840. I also included the city and number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, sorry, and Edgewood. The data in the AWC report was really funky, so I didn't include that. So without Edgewood in there, 85.5 versus the city of Washougal at 71. Okay, so in terms of the benchmark positions, good data for the top positions for the directors. You can see city administrator, HR, the executive assistant to mayor and city administrator, public works director, city engineer. Two new positions you'll see, or two new classifications, I should say, you'll see here, wastewater operations manager and water operations manager. David's going to address that in walking through the public works reorganization as part of this presentation. And then the community development director, building official, finance director, IT manager, and another new classification, accounting supervisor. That's a reclass from the accounting lead position that we have today, which is a represented position, and the recommendation is to create this new position, or new classification, I should say, that would be a non-represented position. Okay. And then turn it up to David, who's going to walk you through the reorg.
Okay. Council, on the screen and in front of you, if you have it in front of you, is an organizational chart that shows our current organizational structure in public works. And just to say, the reason I'm presenting this this evening on behalf of Trevor is he's at a conference getting continuing education units so that he can continue to serve us well in his role. He has to get it all done by the end of the year, so he's at a conference getting that continuing education that he's required to have. Our existing structure, as you can see, we have our director, Trevor. We have our city engineer, Rob. We have a program and procurement specialist, it's Jess, that reports to Trevor but works really closely with Rob. And then we have our assistant public works director position, which is vacant. And we have 3 manager positions that you can see there, and one of them says vacant. And the reason for that is not vacant, but it will be on November 6th, because John, if you don't know John here is moving on to a great opportunity at Clark Public Utilities. We're really proud of John and the opportunity that he has, although we're bummed to see him go. But a really nice opportunity for him. So congratulations, John. But that position becomes vacant. Before I turn to the next slide to talk about what we're intending to do in the department, just to say, you'll recall, Council, that several years ago, the mayor and I started to look at our departments and see if we were organized in the right way. We made some adjustments in finance, as you'll recall. We made some adjustments in community development. And the next department that we began to look at was Public Works. And so Trevor's been working on this for quite a while, actually. It was partly the subject of his master's thesis and also partly the subject of the former assistant director's master's thesis as well. So a lot of good information. Their theses were not just about an org chart. It was about all kinds of different operational things, many of which we're working on now. So that was really helpful for us. However, recently, there are these 2 key vacancies in the department. So that gave us some new data in addition to what we had already been working on. And so we are proposing on the next slide a new chart, a new organizational chart. Kind of flattens the organization a little bit, and this does not add any additional FTEs, and it's cost neutral. So there's some rearranging going on, but it doesn't cost us anything more, and there aren't any new positions. So what you'll see in this structure is Trevor as the director, but and then you'll see down at the very bottom, you'll see those 3 same managers, if you would, except now there's 4. So we are no longer going to have an assistant director that has operational responsibility over the managers of the different programs. We're flattening, and we'll have those managers reporting directly to Trevor. The position of Assistant Public Works Director is going to be recast into the position you see toward the top there, Senior Analyst. The incumbent Assistant Director was really functioning in that role. Some of the key things that the Assistant Director did for us was working with grants, working on organizational analysis, financial analysis, operational analysis, doing things to help Trevor or run the department. And so we are lifting that out of basically the chores that were being done by that position and just isolating them in a position that won't have managerial responsibility over the managers. Have those managers report directly to Trevor. What you'll note, though, is that there are 4 managers there along the bottom as opposed to 3 that we used to have. We are splitting the water and wastewater manager into 2 different roles, and we'll have one that's over wastewater and one that is over water. And then you see Rob as the city engineer there. No specific change in responsibilities for him, and no specific promotion, if you would. However, we want to make sure that we have a clear number 2 person in Public Works. It's a large department, and so we're just adding the title of Deputy Director onto Rob so that he can function in that number 2 role. Before it was the Assistant Director that was providing that service. you can see some of the reporting relationship that we're thinking about in terms of what we'll do with the existing procurement specialist. And I'm happy to announce that for the wastewater operations manager, what we're doing there is we have a promotion for an individual in our organization, Mr. Baker, that's been offered and accepted. And so pending final authorization of all of this, we will implement that. We'll be working on filling what we're calling a vacant water operations manager, and we'll see what decision gets made with that and how that recruitment will go. So again, to emphasize here, I think the key bottom line policy questions for the council. No new positions in terms of the number of people, reorganized in a way, this is Trevor's plan, just presenting it to you, and it's cost neutral. It's not going to cost us anything more to do it this way. We think that this will help the department continue to move to that next level as an efficient and effective organization. And just as an anecdote, one of the things that Trevor did as part of his evaluation of his organization is a really small scope of services with a human resources and organizational consultant that has worked for us in the past, helped us on class comp 10 or so years ago, and recently even. She evaluated all the work that Trevor had been doing, all of his documentation. She looked at 28 comparable organizations in Oregon and Washington and at their organizational structures, and looked at Trevor's proposal, and with minor comment felt that Trevor had really found the ideal structure for our department, and in fact something that she thinks could serve other organizations. So that was very nice to get that feedback. It corroborated all the work that Trevor had been done.
Who was that again?
I forget her last name.
Yes, she's from HR Answers, Judy Clark. She's actually the owner and president of the company, and we used them back in 06, 07 when we last did a full class compensation study that actually informed a lot of the work here, but she provided that additional assistance in looking at the org structure for Public Works.
And there's two Judy Clarks out there that have done work for us. One helped us recently with something else we were doing in Public Works. This is a different Judy Clark. But one has an E at the end and one doesn't, I think. So anyways.
Don't ask which one this is.
Yeah. So she's an industry professional that assists organizations with different reviews. So the implementation of this, in terms of the council's role in it, is that we will be eliminating a classification called wastewater manager, and then replacing that with the two. One says water operations manager, one says wastewater operations manager. We'll basically just use that classification and then just focus each of them in their respective areas. Really nothing to do with the other two managers. One's maybe a little bit of, we're going to change the titles of those just slightly to put the word operations in the management title, so you'll see underline and strike out for that. The salary range for those new classifications is the same as what the managers have been, and Jeanette will show you how that bore out in the class comp study. We have not yet done a full analysis of exactly what the salary range will be for the senior analyst. We'll be wrapping that up. However, we're confining ourselves within that cost neutrality criteria, because that was important to us to make sure it was a cost neutral proposal. So that part, pretty simple implementation, but it will require, the resolution that lists all the positions to list the new ones with the underlines and the strikeouts and all of that. So I want to commend, before I turn it back over to Jeanette, I want to commend Trevor for really outstanding work on this. Really solid job. That corroboration from an industry professional, did a third-party analysis, was very helpful for us, very confirming in that. Done in a cost-neutral way. Jeanette was helpful as well in providing advice and consult through that. So that is just a quick sidebar off of the class comp because it's somewhat related to that, and I know the council was interested because we've had some change here recently, and I wasn't sure if you were aware of John's opportunity. That was really fresh information to us here in the last month. So.
Oh, I just have a quick question. I was just curious, did the assistant public works director that left come up with a similar chart, making himself a senior analyst? You said they were both doing thesis on it. I'm just curious.
You know, I can't remember. There were several models that were in some of the thesis work. I don't remember one that looked exactly like this, but similar.
Okay, so continuing on with the class comp piece, broke the positions into 3 different categories. Those positions for which we have market data, benchmark positions, as I mentioned before. Those positions for which we applied internal equity only, and then positions for which we applied both. So that's how we basically categorized the groups as we looked at the data and did the analysis. Okay, so bringing council back to the policy implementation, the policy that we implemented in August. So kind of 3 key things that came out of that provides guidance into the implementation of these results. The first was to, as we looked at comparative data using the median, what we stated in the policy is that we wanted to achieve plus or minus 5% of what that market median was, where we have the market data. In terms of the implementation, if there was an upward market adjustment that was warranted, that the individuals in those respective ranges, if they were on the range, that was fine. If the range moved and they fell down into the range, it provides an opportunity in terms of step increases down the road, but no immediate adjustment because they were on the range. And then however, if an individual in any one of those classifications fell below the range, they would be brought up to range minimum. So they've been within that competitive window. The second is the downward market adjustment. You recall discussion that we had around the implications of these sorts of results. It was decided that we would not reduce the salaries of those individuals, but what they would do is that the wages of those individuals would be frozen until which time that range moved that could cause either a COLA or a step adjustment down the road. So those are the key points as we go into this. So it's a lot of data here. So let me kind of a high level share with you what this data means. So the green positions or classifications, you'll see for each of them, you'll see the current min, the current max. So this is the current minimum, the current maximum of the ranges as they exist today. The market min and market max based on the median data, and you can see what the minimum and the max come out to be based on looking at the median data. The delta is the difference between the top of the current market max and the top of the current maxes exist today of our ranges. And then you could see adjust up for the green. And I'm going to pick on 3 of these jobs so you can see how they would play out based on the results. The black is no change, so that was within the plus or minus 5% that I spoke of on the previous slide. And then the red was greater than that plus or minus difference, and then and so that would be adjusted. The top of the range would be adjusted downward but the incumbents in those positions wouldn't receive a pay decrease. They would, their salaries would be frozen. So let me pick on 3 of the positions so you could see how these upward, no change, and downward results would play out. So if pick on the police commander, there was a delta there of 8.9%. So that range would move upwards of 8.9%, the top end of that range. The incumbent in that position would be eligible to receive a step increase because their salary would fall into that pay range, if you will. So they'd be eligible on their anniversary date to receive a 3.5% step increase and a COLA, a 1.3% COLA that we're proposing for all the non-represented employees. So no immediate adjustment, employee salary fits within the range, would be eligible for step increase at the next review time, and then would be eligible for a COLA because their salary falls within that range. I'll pick on myself next, I guess, on this particular slide. So my salary is within that plus or minus, so no adjustment at all to that pay range. But anyone in black would be eligible for a COLA, but no step increases because my salary is at the top end. The third adjustment is in red. This is a downward adjustment. So if I pick on the building official, their salary was 6.2, that salary for that range was 6.2% above the market. We factored in that plus or minus 5%. And so what we're suggesting is that should go down 1.2%. Okay, so that incumbent could receive a very, very, very minor COLA, but wouldn't be eligible for a step increase until, of course, that range moved either through future COLAs or market analysis down the road, and the policy states would take a look at that every 5 years. And then rounding out the group there, you can see the remaining positions. And as I think David alluded to in his presentation, we've got the two new classifications up here. And the market data that we looked at there really leverages the existing NU4 range that we have today, so there would be no change to that pay range. But those incumbents would be eligible for a COLA. Okay. Okay, so the 2016 planned and recommended to council adjustments, starting on the wage side, a 1.3% COLA. This is based on CPI, the Portland Salem All Urban CPI, June to June. Number, and also the implementation of this class comp study that I've completed. On the benefit side, for the non-represented employees, currently paying 5% for their own coverage on the medical and 10% for dependents, 5% for employee and dependents on the dental. Going to, and this was actually approved by council, if you recall, back in 2013, we did a multi-year change, if you will, that took us out to 2016. And so on the medical side, continue to pay 5% for employee coverage, but going up to 15% for dependent coverage, and no change recommended on the dental. So this is really looking at what we call the new normal, if you will, in terms of that cost sharing for employees for the medical coverage and dental. And just kind of closing the presentation in terms of the 2016 summary changes. So 9 out of 16 employees, based on this analysis, would be eligible for a merit increase. 1.3% COLA added to all non-represented pay ranges. And so, as I mentioned before, if the employee falls within that pay range, as a result of the 1.3% being added to the pay range, they would receive the benefit of that COLA. We've got 3 new classifications being added. The water operations manager, wastewater operations, and the senior analyst. This is a position, as David mentioned, I have not completed the analysis on that. We'll go out to the market, take a look at that position, see if we can get some comparable data, and look at the internal equity of that position as well. So same number of FTEs, and as David mentioned, cost neutral. We've got the new classification added for accounting supervisor. As I mentioned, lead accountant being reclassed to accounting, yeah.
I have a quick question about that.
Yeah.
You've said it a couple of times, it's the same number of FTEs and cost neutral. I went back to the chart, and I did count an extra person on the reorganization. Just look, I mean, unless we're missing someone from the current leadership roster.
Well, the wastewater operations manager is coming from an existing position that's in the 307 bargaining unit. So there is an additional person on the leadership team, but there's not an additional FTE to the city.
I see.
Right, I should have made that more clear, because yes, when you count, because we split the 1 into 2, and then you'll recall we have a new FTE in the rate plan for the sewer system that's coming in, and that's going to backfill into the team, so that the wastewater team, whose lead is now going to be a full manager, then another position comes in there, and so that made that work for us to do it that way. So there's no net new FTEs to the city based on the leadership of the organization. There is that new FTE that's been programmed into the rate study since the beginning. So thank you for that question. That's a clarification on that.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, not at all. Okay, as I mentioned, new classification added for accounting supervisor. This is a reclass from lead accountant, and it will be a non-represented position. And the medical cost sharing for dependents going from 10 to 15% as approved by council back in 2013.
And I would just mention, council, in terms of next steps, as you know, we meet every week for the first 3 weeks of the month, starting next week. So this is that busy time of year where we scheduled ourselves for 4 meetings in a row, 4th in October, and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in November. So our plan will be next week to have a draft resolution for you, the kind that we bring every year that just makes whatever changes we're making for the non-represented employees. So it will it will propose the implementation of this, and you'll have that at workshop, and then we would have it for your action on the 9th. That's our plan moving forward for these.
So what are you calling this?
This is the classification and compensation. I mean, we did several things with this presentation. We explained to you what was happening in Public Works, because that's something that would be part of this resolution too. But this is on the title slide. It's the classification and compensation results and recommendations for non-represented employees. Our current policy says we're supposed to do this market analysis, as you'll recall, and it says that we're supposed to do it at some periodic frequency that's unstated. It hasn't been done for 10 years. So we brought policies to you during the course of this year that you reviewed and adopted that gave us parameters so that we would know how to do it. So we've followed the policy that you adopted, done the analysis, and this is what the data has provided to us.
Paul?
I've got 2 questions. On the medical insurance side, medical benefit, are we providing any incentives for people to move to high deductible plans?
Yeah, we've had that in the policy for a while now. Once we adopted the high deductible medical plan, we have the HSA, the accompanying
Right.
HSA, that provides for 55% of the cost savings between the high deductible medical plan and the 250 deductible medical plan, which is the baseline plan. So that, whatever that delta happens to be, is then, and on Kaiser too, as well as Regents, is put into an HSA. The last 2 years, it's been, because of the transition to the high deductible medical plan, it's been front-loaded. Going into next year, 50% will be front-loaded, and then the balance will be put into the account mid-year. So we're going to split it 50-50 going into 2016.
I just want to say that that's what smart people are doing, so it's good to hear that we're on that schedule.
Yeah.
Just a brief comment too on the benefits, Council. We just presented that in summary form, just as a reminder. The Council has already acted on non-represented employee benefits. You acted in the fourth quarter of 2013 and put that in place for 14, 15, and 16. It was a 3-year tiered approach to move from the level of employee cost sharing that there was at the time and when the mayor took office, to a target that we all mutually agreed to, which was to get to this for the base plan, this 95.5 for employees, employee cost sharing, and 85.15 for dependents. So you've already implemented that. Everyone's been expecting that. It's just a reminder that that's happening. The high deductible plan is a different scheme, and that's been the same for every year except for what she described.
So, yeah, for those who don't know, in 18, there is what's loosely called the Cadillac tax on very rich benefit plans. It's a 40% tax, and we can't afford to pay a 40% tax. So it's important that we get there, so to speak, and I just, my second question is to make sure that I understand. For example, the Public Works Director is 12.9% below market. No, 12.7, I'm sorry.
Yes, 12.9% Public Works Director, yeah.
Yeah, 12.9.
Yep.
Okay, so what that means is that he can get a COLA and a step, but not 6.6 plus a 1.3 COLA, which equals a 7.9, which would take the delta down to 5%.
No.
Yeah,
What we're doing as part of the analysis is we're restating what that range is. And by restating the range, which will move 12.9% positively, that therefore makes that individual, the incumbent, is within the range, so they're on the competitive salary range.
Oh,
It just
okay.
provides them with an opportunity where they're topped out right now and would only be eligible for the COLA, then, so now they've got some headroom in that range that would allow them to benefit from a step plus a COLA if that was approved by council.
It can't happen all at once.
Right.
Right.
No, it does not make me go to the top.
And then,
Yeah.
and then the third thing is on the selection criteria for comparable cities.
Yep,
The second line is 30% above below, which will assess valuation per capita. That should also specify that they have a police department, a fire department, and a utilities that they're paying for. Because, for example, some cities have none of those, even though they may have
Right.
the same assessed valuation.
right. We didn't look at the mix in terms of the services that those, but for instance, in the case of Washougal, obviously, we don't have a fire department, but we're paying for it.
Right.
So it's likely that other comparable cities don't have, let's say, police or fire, but they're paying for those services for the community elsewhere versus having regular full-time employees
Well, but
providing
they-
that service.
But they may be in an independent fire district, which would be different.
That could happen.
Yeah.
There could be communities that are within 30% that, they might be contracting with a sheriff for police, and they're simply paying
Exactly.
for that.
Yeah.
But they may have a lower. We did not do that. Now, what we did do as part of this analysis is, not every single community, and this is a lot of the detail of the analysis. There are a lot of cities, well, there's 15 cities on the list. We did not use a city if they didn't have that director, for example. They all have some kind of a public works director.
Right.
And then, actually, it was my job. We engaged all of the department heads and myself in this analysis to make sure we were looking at job descriptions.
Right.
I was searching websites, talking to colleagues. We were making sure that these positions were comparable. So that first rough cut about whether we pick 30% of AV or not, we did not refine that in such a way to try to then truncate the list even further by they have some equivalent portfolio of municipal services, however we would define that they had, 6 out of the 8 general services. It was just that was their number just to generate a list. I think what we found with this comparable list is that there were a lot of good comps, particularly for these department head positions. Just about every community's got one of each of these things.
My problem with that explanation is that's on the expenditure side, not the revenue side. And that if you're gonna look at the revenue side, you need to have comparable AV, but also comparable departments that they have to fund.
Yeah, it would be a refinement. I mean, we talked about other refinements as well, like should we have sales tax? Should we have added another variable around sales tax, or do they have a B&O tax? It could get pretty complex in
Right.
terms of how many variables you want to use or how refined you want to be in the analysis. We could have stopped just with population, but we didn't feel that that was, an adequate. The list was much bigger. So it's not perfect in that regard. I mean, there could be further refinement on that.
Maybe
particular
a
one.
better number to look at is general fund revenue, which would include all of those.
Any ballpark on what the additional, or what the COLAs and the additional steps are gonna cost in
I
2016?
know Jennifer has the.
Yeah, Jen gave me a note. Estimate that for the non-represented employees, first year costs for the COLA is $24,000. And the first year cost, well, there isn't more than 1 year on the COLA, just the COLA is roughly $24,000, and the class comp is roughly $43,000. We're gonna be talking in executive session today, and we're gonna go over this exact same information for the 307, and we can answer that question at that time. But that's the subject of bargaining, and so we cannot do that here in the open session.
How about medical savings that will be realized with these new,
Would go into 15%? I don't know. Do we have that number?
is that a,
That savings is pretty modest at this point. I think we
Okay.
achieved most of that savings in the first 2 years of this. We've had a number of us, including myself, and I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I know that there are a number of us that have moved to the high deductible plan, and the city enjoyed considerable savings by doing that. We're estimating year over year for this last piece of the benefits thing, about $5,000 in savings. That savings has already been realized over the last couple of years, particularly from those of us that went to the high deductible plan. That premium is a lot lower than what it is for the other ones.
Other questions? A lot of information, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
just a quick comment. Given the quality of the water services that we have in this city and have had for some time, I'm not surprised that one of our managers is leaving and taking a promotion. It was a matter of time before that happened. thank you for the time you spent with us and the service you rendered. And we hope you trained your replacement well.
Okay, David, are you taking the professional services agreements?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Council, as you know, we are an intervener in the FSEC process. Tonight on consent, there are two professional services agreements, so the information is in the council packet. We discussed this at a recent workshop talking about possible reserve spending in 2015 for unused reserves. We are interveners in the Energy Facility Siting Evaluation Council process with respect to the proposed oil terminal in Vancouver. And I was directed to find out what the costs would be and to bring a proposal to the council for us to receive expert services from experts that could help us be effective as interveners in that process. And we were looking for two types of experts. Got some information actually from our friends at the City of Vancouver about who some individuals might be. One of the issues is around the well field, our lower well field, which is right on the tracks. So we have a proposal from a firm called Aspect Consulting Services. They have offices in a number of places throughout the state, and they have a scope of services for us that will evaluate the risk to our well field and our ability to produce water there from an oil train accident, and specifically the increased activity because of the Tesoro Savage proposal. And on that particular item, the cost is a little more than $13,000. Part of that is an add-on cost that we may or may not need. It just provides some opportunity for us to do some additional work. If it is the council's desire that we be represented by experts during the Energy Facility Siting Evaluation Council process to review the draft environmental impact statement, to potentially give us written testimony that we can submit into that, and be very, very credible, if you would, during that process. This is what it will take in terms of the well field. There's a companion professional services agreement from a firm called Patriot Technical Consulting. Their principal has offices on the east side, but they have a senior staff member who actually works in town, does work in town, lives in Washougal, a former Vancouver division chief, known and respected in the area. This particular analysis will be around the general concept of public safety in our community and all of the impacts to our community, not specifically the well field, but and as you read through the scope, an extensive analysis would be done for us where they'd be looking at the different types of buildings and institutions, how many people are in different places, what the risks would be, what are the capabilities of our resources to deal with that. Not a full gap analysis, that would cost us tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to do, but it'll be kind of a mini one. And most specifically, which will be very important, is they'll comment on the draft environmental impact statement, working with us, help us to comment in a very credible and effective way. That number's a little higher, as you see, that's upwards in the low 20s. That one is packaged out into different tasks. One of them for several $1,000s at the end is kind of an add-on as well, and that would be if we wanted them to actually, in person, testify in the formal adjudication before the FSEC, and that's something we would need to decide and maybe coordinate with the City of Spokane, that's also an intervener, the City of Vancouver, who, it's not an intervener, but it's in their turf, so they get to be at the table no matter what. As you can imagine, it's pretty formal. It's not court, but it's court-like. An administrative law judge is presiding officer, and so it's pretty formal. You can swear in witnesses, they can be cross-examined. If we don't do these professional services agreements, your team, we will do the best that we can do in the FSEC proceedings. We have competent, quality staff. We have the expertise that we have. These individuals are the experts, if you would. There's more than one, of course, but they are much more expert than we are. The Aspect Consulting is geohydrologists that would work on the well field. We do not have geohydrologists on staff. We use geohydrologists. And then the Patriot firm, obviously the former division chief who lives here in town, they have a PhD, and I forget exactly what field that they are an expert in, and then some others that are on their team, I think will really be valuable for us.
Joyce?
Would these studies help us in an NR or in a emergency preparedness plan for the city?
Certainly, this is excellent background information. It's focused on one type of emergency. And emergency preparedness plans, often you'll hear the word all hazard, and I don't have the fire marshal or the fire chief here to talk about that, but an all hazards plan talks about everything. This is just one of those, and it's commodity specific to Bakken crude.
I felt when I was reading it that our water, understanding our water and emergency about our water, what can happen to that is very important
Right.
to our community.
And it's not like we have no information on this. Our water system plan and some of our documents, we have some information. We know we know what's out there, and we know that it's vulnerable. But a lot of precision around that is what we would really benefit from. And the key thing in this process, and I didn't mention this, there's a draft environmental impact statement. Ultimately, it turns into a final environmental impact statement. And the key is, what are the impacts and what are the mitigations? And that's what we're after. If this is going to be approved, what would the mitigations be? What will the applicant to Sorrel Savage do to mitigate the risks to our well field? What will they do to mitigate the risks to our community for public safety? Now, we can advocate all we want ourselves and through our experts. Ultimately, the FSEC will make a recommendation about what those mitigations should be, and the governor will decide ultimately. And some of the legal proceeding part of it is a little over my head. Certainly, we're working with our attorney's office, and Councilman Boger's involved with this at the City of Vancouver, and the individual who forwarded the names to me of the people to contact. So I think the decision point for the council is, do you want to engage the experts? I remember the council talking a lot about we wanted to do intervenor light and not burn through a lot of money, but we wanted to do something. We've raised our hands and we're at the table. Now what do we do? If we want to have some pretty good credibility in there, this is what it will take. We did not budget for this, but there are unexpended, unneeded, appropriated reserves, so no supplemental budget, but these will be reserves that you were planning to spend on other things that we don't have to spend. So there's kind of a two-part question. Do you want to engage the experts? And if so, this is how we'd have to pay because we didn't budget for it.
Dave?
When this first came up, I was very much in favor of it. After looking at it in more depth, I'm not in favor of it. And my reasons, really, there are two basic reasons. One of them is, I think we're a big player in this. I don't think we have a major impact at the table. Secondly, I am confident the staff and the fire department have the kind of information we need to present on mitigation. And it goes back to the very type of planning you were talking about for emergency services. So I'm not, at this point, in favor of this. I acknowledge it's a small amount of money, but I'm confident that our staff and the fire department have the knowledge they already need to do the job. And I think our mayor can, I'm going to reverse myself. I jumped on you last week for representing us at C-Trans. Well, now I want you to represent us here. I don't want you to think I'm an unbalanced guy.
Not a worry.
Thank you.
Connie Jo.
So when do we have to have this decision? Because he mentions, talking with fire department and running this past them. Have you done that? You said you hadn't done that. Or, no, you said they're not here. So
Yeah, they're
have
not
you
here to
spoken
talk,
with them?
to talk about emergency planning.
Yeah.
Yes, I talked to the chief and talked to the city administrator and Camus, and they'll make themselves available. So the analysis that, the risk analysis that's being proposed in the Patriot proposal, which is the community safety
What
analysis.
was the price on that? I didn't write it down.
If we,
25.
yeah, if we, there may be some ways to whittle that down. There's a couple tasks here and there where we might not have to have them do it. That's a not to exceed number, and includes their personal expert testimony at an adjudication, which we may or may not decide to do. It's kind of up to our legal counsel about what they think we need to do. The fire department has the professional skill set, but I do not believe the time to do the analysis that is pointed to in the Patriot proposal. The DEIS comes out on November 24th, and then a 45-day window opens by which we have to have our comments in. A lot of that work you can't do until you see the DEIS. So it wasn't like, well, we should have been working on this for the last 2 years. We won't have the DEIS until November 24th. There was a lot of speculation that they might not release the DEIS on the 24th because they've been delaying previously stated deadlines for a variety of reasons. And in fact, some of the parties have asked that they provide longer than 45 days. Whoever decided that in ALJ, and Councilman Boer can help me with this, he's an expert in these proceedings and he's working on it for Vancouver. That was not successful, and I saw a story that says
they're trying to delay the release of it so they don't have to work on it over the holidays. That's
Right.
basically what.
that's what it was, yeah.
Didn't they confirm though that they were gonna release it on time?
At this point, I don't know if they actually have, I haven't heard otherwise.
I haven't heard otherwise, that it's gonna be released on the 24th. Both of these groups are ready to serve us though, but.
Does this, if we do these studies, does that just pertain to the Tesoro Savage? Or, because if that disappears, something else may come up. I mean,
Well,
these things, excuse me.
sorry, just go ahead, Joyce.
Well, I was
Finish
just gonna say, these things don't necessarily disappear. Would that information carry us into another?
Some of it, certainly. The public safety assessments is going to be we'll be providing some of that data, but it's going to be a categorization of a lot of the different risks and a lot of the different information. But then what happens is they deploy an accident scenario, which is very, very specific to this. However, that baseline data and all of that will be there for anything else, and then you can come in and say, what if it was this kind of a toxic gas? What if it was this? It's a different analysis. For the well field, a lot of the baseline data will be usable, but in all hazard risk assessment planning, it's very risk and hazard specific. So it's not totally plug and play for other hazards.
And this one's kind of location specific as well.
Right. The notion here is the trains are coming through, they've got this stuff on them. There's a lot more of it. Some of that stuff's coming through already. So the risk is there. It's just going to be much higher probability. And that's really our argument, is that the probability of an occurrence is going to be increased by whatever it will be. They've got PhDs to talk about what those probabilistic dynamics are, to try to impress upon the decision makers that, and here's the key, and I don't know if the councilman wants to speak to this, we don't even know if the DEIS is going to even talk about anything outside of Vancouver. It may not even get beyond the site. We think it might get to the city limits. We don't know if it's going to, it hasn't been scoped that way per se, but everyone's saying you got to scope it that way, and Spokane's intervening, but all along the tracks, there may not be a mention of us in there. And you can imagine what our advocacy is going to be. It's going to be, hey, wait a minute, we're here, we're still interveners. You need to address these things. Oh, and by the way, here's what we think is going to happen, and here's some suggestions for mitigation. Or we could be surprised, pleasantly surprised, And the DEIS is wonderfully covering our risks and identifying mitigations. And then the experts' work will be a little bit less, their hourly charges will go down, and they'll say, hey, this is great, yes, we agree, and here's a few refinements that we would suggest. I think it's gonna be the former. That's what we're expecting, Councilman
Well,
Zanotti.
I think the conventional wisdom is it'll cover the city limits of Vancouver, the Tesoro DEIS. Now, there's another EIS that just got ordered for a smaller facility, and that's the one I did my 2-day trial on. And I believe the hearing examiner order in that one specifically says, look at other jurisdictions
Yes,
in that EIS, so.
that's right.
I imagine there'd be quite a few. Now, can other groups appeal it? Can the Friends of the Columbia River Gorge, can they appeal the DEIS if it doesn't have the Columbia River Gorge in it? Or did they have to
They
be
would
an
have to wait till
intervener
there's
to
a
do it?
final decision on the project before they could. So they'd have to go through the whole FSEC process, the governor would have to approve it, and then they could sue on the EIS.
But they're not automatically out because they didn't become an intervener
No.
sooner in the process?
Any party withstanding that's commented in the process can sue under SEPA, right?
So the wellhead is the one on Third?
Right over back behind Starbucks.
I have a-
There's multiple wellheads there.
I have a couple of questions. Patriot mentioned that they wouldn't know until it came out what the costs in the scope would be, depending on whether we were even mentioned in the report or not. Do you have any idea what the increased costs would be for that, or would we be party to decide if we wanted to incur those additional costs, or?
This is a not-to-exceed professional services
Okay.
agreement, so it will not be more than that unless we come back here
All right.
to ask for more. So these are the not-to-exceed costs. Hopefully it'll be less. It'll be closer to that number if, their work, they have to do the maximum work, which would,
Were there any kind of assumptions in preparing this quote, price quote, about what the SOAR EIS would show?
there is, Patriot is assuming that there's going to be little, if anything, in there, in the DEIS. That was my conversation with their principal, Paul. Similarly with our former colleague, Dan, same kind of comment. They're pretty actively engaged with Vancouver on this as well. Ultimately this is about whether the council believes that Washougal, as an intervener in this FSEC process, can influence the decision for an up-the-line community that's, 10 or 12 or however many miles away we are, and whether or not there's any futility in that or not. If you think that we can, then you have to decide how hard do you want to go for it. Do you want to bring experts to the table to speak on behalf of the community, or do you want the expertise that you have in the staff? And I agree. I mean, we can be pretty effective. We can talk about what we can talk about, but we won't be able to do the kind of work that you're going to see in here. City of Vancouver's fire department, with all of the resources that it has, staff positions that aren't on the line, they don't train, they work on this kind of stuff, they are bringing in these types of resources. Now, they also have more financial resources than we do too. They are doing this as well.
They're a direct party as well, not an intervener.
Right, and they're direct parties. So that just gives you a feel for, that's a much larger organization, and they are bringing these same types of experts in. Their costs are a little bit higher because their community's bigger.
Would you
Two other
s-
questions I had two other questions. Is that all right, to get those out? Sorry.
Write it down, because I'll forget it.
Is the specialty, is it so specialized, that well field analysis, that Patriot couldn't take over that as well? Because I noticed their GSI guy does well stuff, and I was just wondering if there'd be any economy of scale of combining those into one company, or if these were so specialized, these two things, that you had to have two.
They'd sub in a
PSAs.
They'd sub in a geohydrologist.
Okay, would that save us much money doing that, or?
Probably not, because when they sub it in, then they're gonna want a little piece of the top.
And then you mentioned other cities that are interveners. Is there any chance of combining our efforts with another city on one of these studies, or are we so specific that?
Our well field is very, very specific, and
Yeah.
our city is very specific. And the only other thing I could think of is if Spokane was going to do it, that somehow we retained the same company to do it, and that maybe we get a 10% discount because, you know, it's like getting your neighbor to paint the house at the same
Right,
time.
right.
But it's a different house, you know, some of the template language. So whether or not the $38,000 could be 30, I don't know. Time is really of the essence on this, and
Yeah, that was my original question.
if we don't adopt these tonight, then we're looking at November 2nd. I could try to get some of that additional information. Now we're talking about trying to do interlocal agreements with other governments. That doesn't usually happen in a very short order. And in less than a month, the DEIS is out. So, you know, per your direction, I scrambled to get this information together. I had a meeting in Vancouver with our city attorney. Councilman Boger was there with his Vancouver hat on, the city attorney from Vancouver. We kind of put a game plan together, got these quotes to bring it to you. My advice is, if you want us to be as effective as we can possibly be, this will be the way to do it. We will do the best job we possibly can if you choose not to do it, and I don't think either one of them is a wrong approach. It's just a question of, you know, how bullish do you want to be in the process?
Okay, Joe?
We've invested staff time. How much have we invested any other costs through this intervening process?
Yes, we,
Some
legal
of that.
fees, and I don't have that number off the top of my head. We could go back and
The
look.
It wasn't a
Ballpark?
lot because he got some help in writing it up.
So it wasn't tens of thousands of dollars. It was a few hours of legal services to make sure that we got our filing in on time and that the filing had some substance to it so that we could be interveners.
Couple thousand.
Right, so we're into it. Certainly you have a lot of, in terms of staff time, it's mine mostly. I've spent, on and off, I've spent quite a bit of time on this, just doing all this evaluation, trying to understand it, putting together these documents.
Well, my reason for asking is we tasked you to do that. We saw a vision of us being included. So we've invested a little bit financially, but a lot administratively. Yeah, it's just, do we
We've got
want to put the money out?
and following up on that, we have a resolution we've adopted
That's right,
that tells us we're gonna participate in this process as an intervener.
yes.
That's right, that was done.
You know, and it was pitched as intervention light. I'm not sure this is out of that realm yet. It's actually a little more than I thought we'd be doing, but I still don't think it's so far outside of it that we need to change course.
I thought that the numbers that they were first gonna quote me were gonna be higher than this, and that I was gonna be trying to scale them back. That's really what I thought. Just knowing how much these things cost, and you've seen all kinds of different professional services agreements come through here. When you engage expertise, whether it's transportation or utility financing or anything, I mean, legal, it's expensive,
So
so.
my thought on it is, it's not that big of an investment. We've tasked our leadership to do this. We find out that you're surprised that it's so reasonable. We've had help from other people. I think we ought to take that next step.
Other questions, other comments? You're still in it no
I
matter
just-
what.
Yeah,
It's just whether
sure,
we get
sure.
additional assistance.
But do we hope to get a seat at the table? You know,
You still have one.
well, we have a seat at the table, but will we be heard? And if we are heard, we want to be prepared. We may not be invited to speak. That's basically,
We'll get to
well,
it.
it'll get to, yeah, maybe in writing or submitted.
I think it's more
but-
whether we submit something like this or
Yeah.
something that's like this. Not saying that you're just gonna pay for paper, but there's probably gonna be a great deal more in-depth information and studies done for it and reasons why and everything else under the sun.
But the reason I see such value in it is it's probably where would we put this on a scale? Water, number one, I don't know, but the safety of our city has been a huge outcry, and we represent those folks, and so the outcry is huge. I think we need to listen to that.
What's the best that can happen out of this for us? I'm just curious.
Well,
Serious mitigation
Governor,
factors?
well, that's out of this mitigation, but the best that could happen probably is the governor disapproves the project.
right.
The worst? Did you say disapprove?
Disapprove,
Oh,
yeah, as
the
far as our,
railroad.
as far as
Yeah,
our
the whole
safety
project.
impacts
Gotcha.
go. Now, there's all kinds of other
It's going
arguments why that shouldn't
backwards.
happen because of, I'm not against oil development, economic development, but as far as impact on our community goes, that would be the best that could happen.
We wouldn't have to deal with that. We would just deal with the, whatever ambient level of risk that's currently happening because we're on that main line.
Mhm.
There's oil coming through here. There's other stuff coming through here. One thing is, no matter what happens in the FSEC proceedings, these studies will give us quite a body of information that we currently don't have. And we'll have identified mitigations at some level. If they're not gonna pay for them, at least we'll know what they are and we can go chase them in other ways.
Yeah.
We've got a lot more cards at the table with Burlington Northern.
Mhm. Or our overpass project.
I mean, I'm thinking that one of the mitigations around, a train that's 1.5 miles long and it just happens to go off the rails at exactly the wrong spot, that it totally compromises all of our ways to get across this one, and boy, we need another one. I mean, this is what we've been talking about with respect to that project. Might be very interesting. I mean, mitigation could be assistance toward that. How to ensure that we can produce enough water in the event that we're compromised for 2 weeks at the well field. How are we going to do that? We've got tie-ins to our neighbor. We have an expert here that can talk all about what our plans are. There's some other things that we could do that they'll cost us a bunch of money. We could get some help. So without getting into all of those details, this will be helpful for us to be able to do that type of analysis.
Can we get Camas to, we talked last time about Camas and the school district helping out with this a little bit. Is that any possibility of that?
I followed up.
You're saying the city of Camas and the district?
No, the city of Camas and the Washougal School District.
Oh.
Right, two partners that would make some sense, and in fact, so I did chat with our friends at the city of Camas. As you know, their council did not pass a resolution, and so their policy perspective is that's where they're at on this. They're observing. They will make all of the resources of our Camas Washougal Fire Department available to ensure that this analysis is done top-notch. And so that's an in-kind service. That's our fire department, so of course that kind of goes without saying, but they're not interested in having any of this analysis done in their community. That was the information that I got based upon the general policy statement of their council when they did not pass a resolution. They did send a letter.
Yeah, Scott sent a letter up.
Yeah, I have communicated with the Washougal School District. Mike has a copy of both of these proposals and said he would get back to me on whether they were interested in having Patriot specifically, not the water study, but Patriot specifically do something a little more specific around the schools. I would imagine our study is going to identify the schools and deal with that to the extent that it can, like everything else. It's possible that Patriot could go even a couple steps further for the schools if they wanted to for their assets that are at risk here. Haven't heard back from Mike yet. That would be separate from anything that you're doing.
You talked to Spokane?
I did not talk to Spokane.
Be curious what they're the only other intervener.
Right.
Be curious what
That's
they're
a city, yeah. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to talk to them. This is on consent this evening because of the urgency of the time. And I understand, it's $40 or almost $40,000 if we go all the way to the top with those that we didn't budget. The funds are appropriated, and so it's accommodated, but you didn't budget it before.
Well, I sit in a school bus on Third, looking at the well field, waiting for a train, probably. I cross that track twice a day with special needs children in my bus, watching that train go by. And I'm always wanting to back up, you know, because you just get stuck there. You don't know you're going to. You're right on the line, and you're like, oh, I don't want to be sitting in this spot right now after all I've learned, you know. So it's big.
You could almost think of this study as akin to, obviously it's not exactly the same, but it's akin to your investment in this land use study that you're doing. It's a significant investment, but you're recognizing the importance long-term for the community. And that's $225,000 that you're investing in that study. This is a lot less than that, different type of a thing. There'll be some value added for us. Whether or not it will make a difference at all in the proceedings is unknown.
Paul?
Yeah, especially the public safety study, seems to me that there's a lot of value there. Because similar really scary events could involve liquefied LPG gas or, as you said, other kinds of gases or toxic chemicals. And that this will go a long way toward kind of giving the outlines, the backbones of a study for our fire and police and public works to think about what those events might mean and how do you plan for them and how do you respond. So, yeah, no, I think it all makes sense to me.
We've been on the Public Safety Committee now, it's my 4th year, and it certainly meets that committee's interests.
Okay, any other questions? Finance, Jen, you're up. Are you capable of speech?
Oh.
Don't sit by me. I'll sit by Dave.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Apologize. Decided to get a nice cold before our presentation today. So I got all the necessities here. I'm thinking that we'll probably just do the 3rd quarter and then save the budget for later. Does that sound like a plan, or? Okay.
15 minutes.
I will find it. Excuse me. Look at that. we're already done. All right, so we have our 3rd quarter update for 2015. And basically the bottom line is we're tracking along according to plan. In the general and street funds, our revenues are at about 70%. Property taxes are at about 57%. We get the second half in this month, so that'll be a good indicator as to where we're gonna end the year once we get those. Next week, we'll start getting pretty good-sized deposits from the county, and
Would
we'll
you
see.
expect it, since that's basically the first half of the year, that 57.6%, would you expect it to be 115% then of the budgeted amount?
It could be, it just depends on if people paid their full amount at the beginning of the year.
Well, there are some that do that.
There are.
Really?
They're rare, but there are some people that do pay those up front. I'm anticipating that we'll collect 100%, and that's kind of where the budget came in for not having to utilize as many reserves as we originally budgeted for. So overall, the revenue was up 7% from 2014 3rd quarter. So what that looks like in the chart here. Sales tax continues to stay solid and strong, which is very good news for the budget, and we did factor that in for 16. We took a pretty good increase for 16 for just going with the trend of how 15 is rolling out, so trying to capture some of that within the budgeting process. The general government charges, which are higher, a good percent higher than the 75%, which you'd expect, is the court fees. We're getting more money through that. And then, of course, subdivision and then building permits are, Mitch's department is staying quite busy, so tracking right along. Expenditures are at 67% of the budget. So by department, there's the layout. Judicial costs are running a little higher this year. It's the incarceration charges and the monitoring and the work crew supervision charges that are trending a bit higher this year. So you'll see when we present the budget later that the judicial budget has been increased a bit to try to absorb some of that in the future as those costs are increasing, especially with the additional officer coming on board. You would expect those to be a little bit higher next year as well, once they're trained and out on the road. Otherwise, things are tracking according to plan. On the utility side, again, my line for the night is tracking according to plan. The water sewer revenues are about 77%, stormwater is about 83%. Expenses for the water sewer side are at 72-ish%, and the stormwater is a little lower at 59%. And there's comparing third quarter to third quarter, and then to actuals of 14 as well. So we're tracking right along there. This is the monstrous spreadsheet that's fun to look at. Other than the general fund, which we would expect to be possibly at a slight deficit status now, just due to the timing of the revenues with the property taxes, that's not a very big deficit at all. The cemetery fund, we just need to do a transfer from the general fund. That's why it's negative at the moment. REIT, we spend out of reserves, so we are going according to plan there. These are the debt and the capital project funds. Again, typically in the capital project funds, we spend the fund balance versus having the revenues coming in those. The water sewer fund and utility funds, the bond redemption fund, we refinance those in the 412. So you'll see in the 16 budget that actually goes away. There's a couple funds going away as we've refinanced debt and consolidated it into one fund. So there are a few that have blank pages for 16. Our projects are tracking and the treatment plant's chugging right along. These are the ER&R funds and the perpetual care and the other funds. The deficit for the agency low-income fund is because we did that transfer back to the utility fund to keep that balance lower in the assistance account. That's why it's showing that deficit, because we moved the fund balance back. All right, our massive earnings on LGIP, they are going up, which is helpful. So we are getting a little bit more interest on our money in the local government investment pool. There's where it equates dollar-wise across all funds.
Probably enough for a set of tires for a police car, right?
Yeah, we have over 10 million in that account too, so it's just amazing. But, oh well, we are earning something, so that's what's positive. The money market account was earning more, and now it's about leveled out as well as the LGIP. So we'll decide which one to go to there to earn the most money on the earning or the investment interest. And then the investment bonds that we have split between the general fund, the water sewer fund, and the bond reserve fund are earning a higher rate, but they're longer term, 3 to 5 years. All in all, we're tracking. Doing well. Everything's positive. Excuse me.
I think you're good on that one.
Perfect. All right.
So do we want to hold off on proposed budget till council meeting? from start to finish.
Yeah.
So we'll hold that one over. Again, we're at that opportunity for any members of the public that would like to comment to council. Okay, hearing none, I've got nothing for you at this time. Council, any items? If not, we will stand adjourned, and we will be back here at 7 o'clock for council meeting. Thank you.